Hello, everyone, and welcome to Spotlight in Business. I'm your host, Tammy Defoe, founder, CEO of GTApreneurs. I'm so happy to have with me today, Zeeshan Rahman. He was the Professional of the Week from GTApreneurs Toronto North Group. He's an amazing professional, but even more than that, he's a great contributor to the other network, a great supporter of the other entrepreneurs. So welcome to the show, Z. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much for having me, Tammy. Doing really well. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And so glad to have you here, right? You are an amazing contributor to the group, right? But also you are an amazing professional. So let's learn more about you and what you do.
Sure. So I am a licensed paralegal in Ontario, licensed by the Law Society of Ontario. Just a quick brief about paralegals. So we are licensed very similarly like lawyers, usually with the legal profession. That's kind of synonymous. Paralegals do take the same type of licensing exams and so forth to become licensed. And as a paralegal, I'm allowed to provide legal services to the greater community, the greater public, in similar ways that a lawyer does. The scope of business and practice is a little different than lawyers. We are not allowed to practice in all the specific areas that a lawyer is. For example, family law, corporate law, and tax law, those are reserved for lawyers. However, other types of law, for example, landlord-tenant board issues, small claims where you may have a breach of contract, a tort, or a case arising out of negligence, those are issues that which go to small claims court. Those are issues where a paralegal can also function. A quick point I wanted to make was in Ontario alone, there are almost over close to 500 different commissions, boards, agencies, and tribunals where a paralegal is allowed to operate. So any person from the general public who may have any issue that has resulted in litigation in any of those agencies, boards, or tribunals to seek out legal help, they can always approach a paralegal.
That's awesome, right? And you did mention labor employment, right?
Yes, so labor law, employment law, human rights, landlord-tenant board issues. There's so many, WSIB, Workplace Safety and Insurance Board, and then that has a tribunal attached to it, the Appeal Tribunal. Even more than that, there's also the IRB, the Immigration and Refugee Board, which also has the immigration appeal process and then the refugee appeal process. So those are some of the key areas where a paralegal can operate as well. There's also a very interesting point about when you have grievances or when somebody in the general public has grievances against the government. So for example, the Municipality Act. If there is a violation against the municipality and you have been cited for that, you go to the municipality tribunal, right? There's MPAC. Excuse me. Other than that, like I said, there's also the Financial Services Commission. It's called FISCO. If you're operating a business or you wishing to operate a business and you need a license, a liquor license or a business license, and somehow there's resistance either from the public authorities or from the community where you want to erect your business and so forth. License Appeal Tribunal, that's where you would take your case and have it adjudicated by a member of that board or that tribunal.
Very good. And so what would be some examples of like an employment case that you might bring forward?
Brilliant question. So employment cases, there's constructive dismissal or wrongful dismissal. So constructive dismissal is something that an employer institutes in their company as a policy, which is not directly aimed at you, but it's just a general policy. However, it has an indirect effect and a negative effect on your ability to perform the work. Constructive dismissal would be a policy where they're not actively targeting that employee, but somehow the policy that they have instituted discriminates against that employee from performing the task or diminishes that person's capacity to do that task. So that, and then based on that, if there is a dismissal, if based on that, if the employer says, oh, you haven't been performing at the rate that we thought you would, or you haven't been doing the tasks that we think you should have been doing, that would be something along the lines of a constructive dismissal. A wrongful dismissal is something that is directly aimed at the employee. So the employee did something or behaved in a certain way, or is from a certain social group or ethnic group, and a policy is made directly against that employee. And based on that, the employee is not able to perform the tasks fully and results in a dismissal. That would be something that is a wrongful dismissal. Now, employment cases range from, severance pays. Employment issues range from discrimination in the workplace, harassment in the workplace. So the spectrum of damages or quantum that one could gain from an employment case is very diverse. So each case is very specific. But again, usually the cases that we get to see or come to us are about wrongful dismissals, where an employee has felt discriminated or has felt harassed, or has been fired from the job because of certain unemployment related issues. And so thereby being mostly wrongful dismissals. And to seek quantum again, there is a certain criteria that has to be met, and from thereon you look at whether this will go to the specific tribunal, whether it will go to small claims court, and then we proceed from there.
Now, we know with the COVID situation that like the rental situation, right, has been really affected. I mean, it's good for renters right now, but really hard for landlords. So what are some examples of some cases that you've been working on like lately, whether it be from either landlord or tenant perspective?
Thank you. So before I start the conversation on COVID and rent, I just wanted to kind of caveat the whole conversation by saying that COVID is very new, almost absolutely brand new to the entire global population and to all these societies. So when you're looking at what kind of law exists for one to navigate during this COVID period, there isn't any, right? So a lot of the things we're experiencing for the very first time in terms of what should be the policy because of COVID, or what should be the policy or law because COVID affected an individual. So it's creating some concern, and it's also creating a lot of delay into getting those results. Having said that, the Landlord-Tenant Board and the Residential Tenancies Act, which governs residential tenancies in Ontario, has very specific rules about tenant obligations and responsibilities and landlord obligations and responsibilities. The major tenant obligation is you have to pay rent as consideration for the place that you're staying in. And there isn't any conditions where it says, oh, if there is, a global pandemic, then your rent is, deducted or reduced and so forth. So in courts, you go by the letter of the law. So in those situations where tenants are disadvantaged because they've lost jobs and so forth, it's difficult for them to pay rent on time. It's difficult for them to pay rent regularly. So the cases that have been coming to us have been a lot about rent arrears. Now, during these times, the government, as well as what we have advised clients as well, landlords as well as tenants. I have clients from both sides, both landlords and tenants. And I advise them to be very proactive. I advise them to be more transparent in this situation. One of the best things about law and the legal system in Canada is the idea of reasonableness. What I mean by reasonableness is the courts and the justice system wants to see that all the parties, or at least the parties, have been reasonable towards each other in trying to resolve their issues. So when you have rent arrears, or when you have a damage to property, or when you have somebody wishing to regain possession of their property after having a tenant live in their investment property for 3-4 years, or they're looking to sell their property because of the financial situation they're in because of COVID. In all of these situations, the biggest thing an adjudicator will want to see is how reasonable are the parties towards each other. Are they communicating regularly? Did they communicate regularly? Did they do the extra step to accommodate the other party, and so forth, right? So those are the kind of things. So communicating, be transparent. If you're looking to sell the property, don't drop it, on the 11th hour on the tenant. Give them sufficient time saying, hey, I'm looking to sell the property. I'm giving you proper notice. Now, in every situation, it's not going to be amicable. That's understandable, right? But however, you are showing to the courts and to the tribunals that you are doing your due diligence in being as transparent and as open about the situation and what you're undertaking. And that leads to better, I should say, credibility in front of the adjudicator. When you're looking at selling the property, there are different stipulations. Law has the conditions which have to be met. So the legal conditions have to be met no matter what. However, the added bonus that I suggest is, that accommodation as far as you can without undue hardship. That's another thing, right? You don't have to do everything that the other party wants, but do as much as you can to accommodate, to expedite the process, and to make it smoother and more amicable.
Yeah, so that's basically going to help if it's from a landlord's perspective, right? If it's not just, okay, well, I want to throw the person out, but if you tell the court, you say, okay, we've done all these steps, to try to resolve the situation, and gave this person all this, opportunity and chances and stuff like that, then they're going to say, okay, yeah, the tenant is not,
Sure.
Sorry, my cats are.
No problem. We're always inviting new guests, so no problem.
Yeah, exactly, right? But that's good to know, right? But the thing is that, so people can just reach out to you, right? If they have any questions and stuff like that, if they're not ready to put a case forward maybe, but they just have some questions.
Absolutely. So what I was going to say is the law is very accessible to the general public. You can do your own research and go from there. The legal, the websites for the boards and the tribunals and even the courts has a lot of direction for the general public and how to do the work themselves. And the whole entire reason the paralegal profession kind of came into being is this idea of access to justice. So the access to justice is more about when you are not able to afford that lawyer, when you're not able to retain that lawyer because of the high legal fees and so forth. But you do need some legal expertise. And in that situation, who should you talk to? Who should you speak to? So paralegals kind of came about to fill that gap. And that's where we kind of operate and kind of go from there.
Yeah, now a lot of people too, they don't realize, the education in that with paralegals, right? In that they may think, well, they're not as good as lawyers, so maybe I shouldn't hire them. I should just hire a lawyer. But can you tell us more about your educational background?
Sure. So I have had a very diverse education. I grew up internationally. I came to Canada for my university. So I did my education at York University, my undergrad and my postgraduate in political science, development studies, and a bit in law. And after that, I worked a lot with international organizations. So I worked with ICDDRB, which is an international health research organization. My focus at that time was more about public policy and how to take research and institute into government policy and so forth. So that was my knowledge translation in development terms and so forth. I came into paralegal after I came back to Canada. I was more focused on law or legal issues when I was doing my work internationally. And once I came back to Canada, I got into paralegal because I liked advocacy. One of my most cherished passions is being an advocate. to be able to be in front of an adjudicator to advocate for how I believe the case should be interpreted and how I believe a certain situation should be interpreted. To be able to take those principles, to be able to take that research, the evidence, and present an image, a picture to an adjudicator to kind of go from there. So I got into paralegal then, and luckily Canada is the only, or sorry, actually Ontario is the only jurisdiction around the world which allows paralegals to be licensed individually and operate their own personal businesses. A lot of people, when they think paralegal, they're very easily associated with paralegals across the border. In those situations, the paralegals that are in the U.S. are operating or as working as an employee in a law firm, and they always have to be supervised or report to a lawyer. Now, that's not to say that still does not exist in Canada. It does, and also in Ontario. But the added benefit of being licensed by Law Society is I operate my own business. So when a client walks through my door, they sit down, the retainer is with me. I listen to their issues. I am the one who's on record for them in the courts. I give them the advice. I'm not reporting to a lawyer. I'm not being supervised by a lawyer. So my education and my experience, that's what counts towards when I'm doing the consultations and giving advice.
Right. So you're more than just the Meghan Markle from Suits that just does all the work for the lawyers, right?
Not as pretty, but hopefully.
Yeah. But so now your 4-year undergraduate university education was in what topic?
In political science and development studies. So I was more at that time focused on international development. So I was looking at global security studies. I was looking at multilateral organizations like the UN, World Health Organization, World Bank. These are the kind of organizations which go around in mostly the developing world, Asia, Africa, Latin America. And they provide help in terms of developing on a kind of macro level within the country. And my focus was on how to create good governance policies in some of these countries. My education and work was related to how to bring about more democratic principles in institutions. Now, yes, it's macro, but you're looking at bringing about, let's say, good governance policy in a certain aspect of government. So, for example, healthcare, right? Some healthcare is privatized, some healthcare is public, and there's big disparities in these countries. So when I was working with ICDDRB, one of the reasons was how to bridge that gap so that the rich are able to afford the private healthcare, but the poor and the less marginalized are more marginalized are reserved to only accessing public healthcare. So how do you bridge the gap in service provided, but you can still have that private and public partnerships within a country? So it was a lot of research through community groups. It was a lot of research through service providers, and then looking at that research, analyzing it, and then trying to influence and turn it into a policy, and then suggesting it to the public government officials, right? The government officials, to say, this is something that you can institute, which would make your service more accessible, something that would benefit a greater community, and so forth. So an example I can give you is I'm originally from Bangladesh. And in Bangladesh, a great majority of the population are rural population and poor population. So the healthcare that they tend to get are usually from community healthcare providers, and then they go to government facilities and so forth. Private healthcare is very cosmopolitan, and it's in the metropolises. So therefore, not a lot of the rural people have access to those private healthcare. But
yeah, so I can see that even though it wasn't actually law you were taking, but because you have this passion about helping people, right? Helping people who maybe they can't advocate for themselves, so then obviously the landlord-tenant, right? They're not getting their money. That's not good, right? But then also human rights, like you've mentioned before. So people are being discriminated, whether it be in terms of housing, they're being discriminated against. right?
Very
Or
true.
in the workplace, right? And harassment, So I know I worked in a place before where, I was being harassed and bullied and stuff like that, right? And so there are tons of people who are in that situation. And, a lot of people, they just quit and that's it. Right. And then, then you start over somewhere, right? And all those years you had and stuff like that. So sometimes it is good to, try to get some compensation, for the
I think
aggravation you've gone through.
the advantage I had was you're looking at it from an in-between place. You're looking at something that's in demand by the public, and then you're looking at how the government would create that law, the challenges of creating that law. So now how it helps me is when a client comes to me and says, oh, but why is the law this way? And why is the law that way? Because they only see it through their lens. I can objectively say, well, yes, that is correct. It's, it may seem advantageous to the other party, but you have to see it from the other perspective. And so I think for me, how it benefits is it helps to calm clients down because they're very riled up or they're very frustrated by their situation. So they come in almost sometimes expecting immediate results. And then when I kind of cite the law to them saying, unfortunately, the law works this way, and it works this way because of these reasons, you have to show a little bit of patience. You have to show a little bit of calmness as to how you navigate the legal process. And to our benefit or against our benefit, legal TV dramas do have some influence on the general public. So they come in thinking, oh, is this something that's going to happen like that? Not really, right? So the first thing we say is, if if you're thinking of, Bull or Boston Legal, right? Or if you're thinking of LA Law, those are from the 80s, right? We're not in court like yelling and shouting and making grand statements and so forth. No, this is a very methodical process in law, and it's a sustained process. So it requires a lot of analysis, and that allows us to provide very comprehensive solutions and comprehensive advice to our clients.
Sorry, I have another interview that we're kind of going a little bit longer.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, and he's calling me right now, so apologize for that. But can you tell us right now, because you've got your master's degree, right? So what is your master's degree in? And
it's
how?
In political science. That was more in international relations. So it was more about basically intergovernmental relations, relations on basically multilateral actions. So, how governments would work within a UN framework. And in that, I also worked, again, like I said, more about good governance, democratic principles and institutions within developing countries and so forth.
Perfect, good. Okay, so one last thing before we wrap up. Can you give me one example, a recent example of a client that you've helped? What was the situation and what was the resolution?
Okay, so let's kind of do a 360 and go back to the first question you asked about landlord-tenant. I think this would be a good one that would resonate. So the landlord had rented it out to a tenant, and unfortunately, the tenant was having a lot of difficulty paying the rent. And throughout COVID, they had a lot of difficulties. So they accrued a lot, like almost all the months in 2020 as rent arrears. One of the situations was the tenant stopped communicating, and the landlord felt very helpless and was not able to. Now, this situation was exacerbated by the fact that the landlord's elderly parents had also traveled from abroad to live with them in Canada, and they needed that space also for their own personal use. So it was multiple situations that was affecting this relationship. I was brought into the process fairly early, right before COVID, actually, and I tried to engage with the tenant a number of times. Unfortunately, the tenant was not so responsive, and we were resigned to having to take this matter through the tribunal. One of the reasons I also approached the opposing party is to show that before you get to in front of a judge, the decision-making process is still within your hands as the client, as the opposing party. So you could come up with any solution, and that solution would be something that you like, that you accept. However, once it gets in front of the adjudicator, you kind of give away that right. Now it's the right of the adjudicator to make that decision. So we tried to negotiate. Unfortunately, it didn't work. But then we did go in front of the tribunal. And in front of the tribunal, I advocated for the landlord, and we spoke and we discussed. And even at the 11th hour, I think it was 10 minutes prior to the hearing, we were still trying to negotiate and come to some resolution. And at the hearing, we adjourned so that I could go back and speak to the tenant to realize a solution. And very fortunate, we did come up with a solution while we were supposed to be in a hearing, and that worked to the benefit of both parties. So, and then we went back into the hearing again, and I told the adjudicator, this is how we've kind of resolved the issue. The adjudicator was very impressed in terms of the ability for the parties to come together, even when you are kind of, right on that cliff about, whatever decision the board member might make. And we resolved that issue, and they've kind of gone on their separate ways and things like that. So advocacy is not just a client walks in, I get your file and I wait for court. Advocacy is the steps in between where you may negotiate with the other party, or you may have opportunities to speak, and it may facilitate realizing solutions and possibilities that aren't there because you're thinking in a very skewed fashion, just thinking lawsuit and court and tribunal. So those negotiations, they play a large part in terms of minimizing the damage. It's also a cost issue, right? Going all the way to trial at court and so forth, it's time, cost, effort, the mental distress. But if as a legal professional, if I'm able to alleviate some of that pressure by negotiating something 3 months prior, then why not, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks so much for coming, Z. I mean, we could talk about this all day long. I love talking with you, and that I'm so glad I met you in that. Right, I'm always happy to, send people your way that are looking for that. We didn't really have time to talk about the fact that you are opening an immigration consultant part of your business. So if anyone here is, I know people in Canada that are looking to, stay in Canada permanently, right? Or they want to be coming from other countries to Canada. If you just have some questions, to reach out to Z, but he can help you through the whole process. You and your family, great guy. I don't know when he sleeps because he's so busy, because, he's doing so many things, but you know what? You do them all well, very well, Z. So thanks again for coming today. And
thank you very much. Sorry,
go
ahead.
We'll talk to you again.
Thank you, Tammy. Yeah, no, absolutely. GTApreneurs has been a great platform for me to connect and network with people. So I really appreciate the effort and time that you put into bringing people from different backgrounds and diverse backgrounds together. So yeah, as you rightly said, once we start talking about the services and so forth, we could talk for, 5 hours, 6 hours, the whole day. So, but thank you for giving me the spotlight. I really appreciate it. I hope the knowledge and awareness reaches out to a lot of people. Happy to help out the community, the GTApreneurs community, whenever I can. So thank you again, Tammy.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And we're going to put all of your information in the with a video here. People can reach out to you by phone or by email and check out their website as well. So you're awesome, Z, again, and you enjoy the rest of your day. You're very welcome.
You as well. Take care.